Hi everybody, welcome back. Welcome back. I hope you had a wonderful week and that you built some pretty powerful dashboard apps with Dashplotly. So in this tutorial, I want to show you how to build an app using the dcc.Store. The dcc.Store is one of the Dash core components, and it's a very, very important component to know. This component allows you to share data between callbacks in your app, also to share data between tabs, or even to share data between multiple pages if your app has multiple pages. So we're going to build this app together, and this is exactly what I'm doing. I'm using the dcc.Store to store the data set that the user has chosen, the built-in data set in Plotly Express, to store the data set in the user's browser. So it's going to be inside the browser, and then it pulls the data from the browser to create this graph and to create the data table. Now this is very simple, right? But you might have an app that has 5 different callbacks for 5 different graphs, or 10 different callbacks for 10 different graphs and data tables. Without the dcc.Store, it becomes very clunky and very heavy on the server. If every callback you have to extract the data or upload the data set into every callback and create the graph and create the data table, after 10 callbacks, uploading the data 10 times through the server is very heavy on the server. So with the dcc.Store component, this is where the magic comes in, because it actually stores the data in the user's browser, in the user's session, and then it'll just use that data and share it with all the different callbacks or the different pages. Now this is very theoretical and it might sound confusing, so join me, let's build this app together, and I promise you'll understand by the end of this tutorial how to use the store component and how powerful it is when building your apps. Make sure to stay until the end, or if you don't want to stay until the end, that's completely fine. Make sure to skip to the last part, the important talking points about store, because that's where I'm going to talk to you about what to keep in mind when using the store component. There are very important things you should know. All right, so going to, like always, going to my GitHub. It's going to be the link under the video. Going to the Dash Components folder, going to Store, and here in Store you can click on this and you can just copy paste everything and create your own Python file that you can run on your own PyCharm or Visual Studios or wherever you want. Okay, this is the same thing. All right, so once you downloaded everything, I'm also going to put these 2 links under the video, so feel free to go there as well. This is very helpful. Dash documentation is very, very comprehensive and helpful. Okay, so let's go into the code. The first couple of things, we're just importing the data, the libraries here. Make sure to use Dash 2.0 or higher, right? Because it's not going to work with a later version of Dash, an earlier version of Dash. And importing pandas, Plotly Express, just a style sheet so I can create rows and columns. And then I have my layout here. We'll quickly go over the layout. The title, sharing data between callbacks, as you can see here, title. And then we have a div, and then we have a drop down. As you can see here, the drop down is inside a div right here. The drop down has 3 different options. A gapminder value, a tips value, and an iris value in the form of a string. It's going to start automatically with gapminder. So if you refresh the app, you see that it starts with gapminder, which is called also country data. And these are, you will use this to load the data sets. And then we have 2 empty divs, 1 row here and 1 row underneath. This empty div is going to be called graph1, and it's an empty children, but we're going to put inside the children, we're going to put a graph in here. And this div has an empty children, and here we're going to put a table. Okay, we're using the callbacks. And then we have the dcc.Store. dcc.Store is the store component. This is the ID. The data is going to be, for now, just an empty list. There's not going to be anything in the data. And the storage type is memory, but there's also local and there's also session, which I'm going to go over at the very end of the video. This is very important to know how to use. Okay, so this is just the layout. So if you actually hashtag everything out from code row 84 to 30, you'll see that we only have the title and the dropdown, right? The title and the dropdown and nothing else, because these are all empty div and this is just an invisible component. All right, so let's hashtag back in the callback. This is from row 30 to 46. This callback is what allows us, in this callback, we are uploading the data set chosen into the store component, into the data, which means we're saving the data set in the user's browser. When the user is using your app, this data is going to be saved on their browser. So let's see how we're doing this. What we're doing is we're going to take the input at the component property is going to be the value of the component ID of this ID, which is, if you can recall, the dropdown. This is the ID, data set chosen. So the value is gapminder at the very beginning, but when the app loads, but if the user chooses restaurant tips, the value will be tips. So if the user chooses restaurant tips, now the value is tips, which means that this will equal tips and this will equal tips, right? As an example, which means then we're saying if the user chose, if the value equals gapminder, do something. If the value equals tips here, then do something else, and so on and so on. What are we doing? We're saying if the value that the user chose equals gapminder, which is this one, the country data, then go into Plotly Express data, which is built-in data sets for demonstration. I did that by clicking Control left click, and you'll see all the data sets on PyCharm. So go in there and pull the gapminder data set and just create an object. We'll call it data set, right? If the user chose tips in the dropdown, tips, then we're going to pull the tips data set right here. Okay, so we have the last one is iris data set, and everything is saved as a data set object, and then I'm returning this as a list of dictionaries. Dataset.toDictionary records. This is a list of dictionaries, and you can actually print this out like this and see what it looks like. You'll see below that it looks like a list of dictionaries. And where is this going to? This is actually returned to the, oops, these are very long lists. These are actually returned to the data prop of the stored data. And the data prop of the stored data is right here. This is the stored data, and this is right here. So this is actually being returned. This is an example of the list I was telling you about. Too long, we can go over this later. So this is actually all this right here is actually returned into here and then into here, like that. A list of dictionaries. And this list of dictionaries is actually our data frames, our tip data frame. But this has to be a list of dictionaries. And why? Because if you just return the data set, let's look at the error that it gives us. If you just return the data set itself, let's go back to the code, callback error. It says the value that we returned is not a JSON serializable value. So this has to be a JSON serializable value, which is, you can go into store, into this link below the video, and you'll see these are the values that you can store inside the dash component, the dash store component. You can use a dictionary, a list of dictionary, a number, a string, or a Boolean. You cannot return a data set. This data set is a pandas data frame, a pandas core data frame, and that that cannot be returned into the store. So you have to return a list of dictionaries or a number or anything else. So when I say this goes into the data prop right here of the store component, what I'm saying is this is going to be saved in the user's web browser, in the web browser session. So it's going to be saved on the user's browser, and then you're going to see with the next callback, we're actually taking, come on, from line 69 to 47, we're taking the store data from the browser and we're going to create a graph from that data. And if you had 10 different callbacks, you would just do this all the same. You will take the data in the input and just create whatever you want to create in each and every callback, or in each and every tab, or in different pages. So let's see how the second callback works. We'll go here, we'll make sure that it's still working. Perfect. So we have our graph that is coming up with the data. So what are we doing here? Here we're going to say take the data prop from the store data. So take it from here, and remember this is now this, because this was the first callback, and with the first callback this was saved in there. So we're actually taking this in here. It's the same thing as saying take this, right? Or which is the same thing as here, because take this, right? Because the data always is the first argument of the callback function. Take this data set. Let's just print the type and see what type it is. You can see that it's right here. Let me make this bigger for you so you can see. Print type is a list type, because it's a list of dictionaries. And then we're going to turn this list of dictionaries into a pandas data frame. We're going to save it as a DFF object. So this is, and then we're going to print it out. So we're printing the head of the pandas data frame like this. And then we're going to just print the type to show you that it's actually a pandas core data frame. All right. So we turn this into a pandas data frame, and now we're just going to create the graphs. Now there's three different options. There's three different data sets that the user could have chosen. They could have chosen the Gapminder data set, or the tips, or the flowers iris data set, and I don't know what they chose. So there's different ways to do that. I'm just gonna, I know that in the Gapminder data set we have these columns, so I'm just gonna say if the country string is one of the columns, is one of the data set columns, then just build this graph. If it's a different one, if it's a total bill, which is one of the columns, then we know it's the tips data set, then just build this graph, and so on with the same thing with the iris data set. So let's change this for a second. Let's change this to iris data set, flowers. So here what I did, the user chose flowers, and it says if sepal length is one of the, and you can see that sepal length is one of the columns in the DFF columns, then build this scatter plot where the x-axis has the sepal width column, the y-axis has this column, and then the color is species. As you can see here, x-axis, y-axis, and color species. Okay, so we built this graph, this figure, and then we return a DCC graph component, and you build this plotly express, you return this plotly express inside the figure prop. This is how you build figures in Dash. And all of this, remember, returns to the output, always goes, whatever you return in the function, right here, this is the function, whatever you return, returns to the component property of the output. So this returns here, like that, and it's the same thing as, this is the children of graph 1, it returns right into here, children of graph 1. So this is why in the layout, you'll see the second div has a graph of the iris, okay, or of the flowers. Okay, last example, or last callback. Now let's unhashtag this, and you'll see here again, we're going to take this callback that starts on line 72 that creates the data table. So we're going to take the the data from the browser. Remember, we store the data set in the user's browser. We're going to pull it, put it inside the callback function, and then we're going to, this is a list of dictionaries. We're going to create a data frame, pandas data frame out of this list of dictionaries. And from this, we will create our data table. This is a regular three lines of code to create a dash data table. And this is how we are creating this data table. So let's do one last summary or review. Let's take an example where the user is choosing the restaurant tips value. So if the user chooses restaurant tips, you'll see up here, the user chose restaurant tips in the dropdown, then value will be equal to tips. It will upload into the app the restaurant tips data set from Plotly Express, and then it will save it as a list of dictionaries into the data prop of the store data in the client's browser. It's going to save it in the client browser. And now that's already in the client browser, now we can pull the data. We're going to pull the data set, list of dictionaries, turn it into a data frame, a pandas data frame. And then if we have total bill as one of the columns, we are going to create this bar chart. As you can see here, this bar chart, which is actually returned inside the figure prop. This bar chart, Plotly Express bar chart, is assigned to the figure prop of the dash graph component, which is returned to the children of graph one right here. Okay, and same thing is happening with the data table. We're taking the data set, the data list of dictionaries, making it a pandas data frame, and creating a dictionary. So a data table. So now you can see the advantage, because if you have 10 callbacks, you don't want to upload. This is a very small data set, but let's say you're uploading a data set from an API, from the internet, SQL, and let's say it's like 7 megabyte, 8 megabyte. You don't want to do that for every single callback that you need the data for, right? To create graphs or data tables or whatever. You want to do it just once, upload it into the browser session, and then use this in all the callbacks that you need and all the tabs or all the pages that you need. Okay, like I promised, very important talking points about the store, the dash store component. The dash store component takes data in different forms. You cannot save or upload to the user's browser pandas data frames. You have to have a string-like JSON serializable value, which is either a dictionary, a list, a number, a string, or a Boolean. So keep that in mind, or you will get an error message that we got at the beginning. You have to think about if your app is going to be for mobile or laptop. It's generally safe to store up to 2 megabytes in most environments, like mobile phones. But on desktops, you can store up to like anywhere from 5 to 10 megabytes on the user's browser. And the last thing to keep in mind is that the session, this is what I promised to tell you at the very beginning to go over. Here, you go to code line 26, you'll see that the storage type has either memory or local or session. This is how long the data is saved in the user's browser. If I do memory, then this is saved. This is an example the dash is giving us. This is saved in the user browser until I refresh the tabs. If I refresh this, you'll see that from 7, this becomes 0. You see, now this is 0. So this is like the shortest memory. The second best memory, or the second longest memory, is session storage. So this will store the data until this is 3. This will store the data even if we refresh. But if we close the tab, let's go down here, you see it's a 3. But if we close the tab and open it up again, you see that now it becomes 0. So if you close the browser or close the tab, the session storage becomes 0. The data is lost. Local the local storage that you use here, if you use local here, this will be saved inside, I think inside the browser's cookies. So even if you close a tab or close a browser and open it, this data will still be saved on the client's browser. So just think about it, think how long you want your data frame to be saved on somebody that's using your app. You have these three options. All right, I hope you enjoyed. I hope this taught you a lot. This is very powerful, again, if you want to use it for different pages, or if your app has different pages. If you have any questions, let me know. That's really it. Always remember, we're better together, so help each other out, and I'll see you next time. Bye-bye.